Many of you know that CED has for a long time been active on education issues, and I think this may be the first time in our 70-year history that we've been active on all fronts all the time. We have ongoing, and I should say well-funded, projects on early education, K-12 reform, and of course today's report on post-secondary reform. And I'm pleased to say that our work today is generously supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I think this is a very important time for American post-secondary education. In all the years that I've been working in this, I can't remember a time where there's been this much focus on the issue. And I think that is in part for several reasons. One is the economy, the focus and the interest in jobs, but also the Obama administration, along with foundations like the Gates Foundation and the Lumina Foundation, have raised issues about the importance of having more young people in this country, more Americans with post-secondary education. And that's a very important goal, and I want to salute both the administration and the foundations for raising this issue and doing so much to promote the reforms that our post-secondary sector is going to need. And I say post-secondary intentionally. Some people will say there's the higher ed sector, there's the for-profit sector. In my view, we're all in it together. One can differentiate among those sectors, one can have fights among those sectors, and God knows there are never any real fights in education reform, right? Right, Marilyn? But at any rate, the focus now is unlike anything I've seen in the last 30 years. You also see it reflected in books that have been published over the last 2 or 3 years by Richard Aram here in New York, by Andrew Hacker, Ben Waldowski, Bill Bowen, and of course Andy Rosen, who runs Kaplan. So I think this type of ferment, what Clayton Christensen might call disruptive innovation, is going to continue. And what we're launching today at CED is the first wave of what we hope will be a multi-year commitment to helping this country reform post-secondary education. I think these reforms are going to be driven by the costs. I think they're going to be driven by competition, supply and demand inside this country and around the world. All you have to do is read Ben Waldowski's book and you'll get that picture pretty clearly. And I'd also add that the issue, at least from our perspective at CED, is not just about jobs. It's also about the vibrancy and the quality of our democracy, of having educated citizens who are capable of making decisions for themselves and choosing among very important issues that touch on their future and our future. As we put together the subcommittee that produced this report, we had what I call the dream team at CED. Our co-chairs are Jeff Jarris, whom I will introduce later, the global CEO of Manpower Group, who really lives and breathes these issues every day. So Jeff, I want to thank you for your service, and also Bruce McClowery, longtime CED trustee, president emeritus of Brookings, very active on several education fronts, not only at CED but also in Washington, D.C. with a few battle scars from this work. So Bruce, thank you also for your service. It's now my pleasure to turn the proceedings over to one of my two bosses, Roger W. Ferguson, Jr., who is the co-chair of CED, along with Don Peterson. We are in Roger's building, TIAA-CREF, and Roger is the CEO of this great organization. And I just want to say a personal hero for the years that you spent in government and the service that you provided to this country. That's a short intro, but you've done a lot, and we're pleased to have you as a co-chair of CED. Roger Ferguson.
Charlie, thanks for that kind introduction. As all of you now know, I am Roger Ferguson. I do serve as a co-chairman of CED, and I'm also the president and CEO here at TIAA-CREF. And it's also my distinct honor to welcome you today to TIAA-CREF for the release of this very important policy statement, Boosting Post-Secondary Education Performance. The statement comes at a very special time, as you heard from Charlie, in the history of CED, because this is the 7th anniversary year of CED. And it also is important because we are really celebrating with CED a remarkable leadership that it has had in a number of issues, and you heard Charlie mention them already. Over its long history, CED has made education a signature issue. And for those who don't know about TIAA-CREF, we are the leading financial services firm, particularly retirement firm, with the focus on education. And so there's a natural link between TIAA-CREF and the issues in this statement. CED has worked on education reform and workforce readiness, as Charlie said, and we've engaged our trustees, and CED is unusual in that it is really driven by business leaders who are its trustees. It's not the usual think tank, but it's really trustee-driven. And that's why this is all the more important, because this is the voice of our trustees around an important issue. Charlie was clear that the interest of CED spans all layers of education, early childhood development, K-12, on through post-secondary, as he said. And importantly, because CED is driven by business leaders, there's a focus naturally there in skills enhancement and lifelong learning. But I echo Charlie's major point, or one of his points, which is that having an educated workforce is fundamental to having an educated society, which is fundamental to maintaining democracy. And so all of these things are wed together. I'd like to acknowledge, as Charlie already did, the incredible leadership that we had in our post-secondary education subcommittee. Charlie mentioned the two co-chairs sitting here, Jeff Joris, who's the chairman and CEO of Manpower, Bruce McClary, who Charlie has also referenced, who's the president emeritus of Brookings. The report was directed by Pat Callan, who's the president of the National Center for Public Policy and Higher Education. And we're delighted to have all three of those folks here with us today. It also had some members of the subcommittee in the room, so Marilyn Resnick from AT&T, and I want to congratulate all of you for the development of this really fine report. I want to also take a moment to recognize Charlie and his team. They were very important in preparing the statement, and as I've looked at it again over the weekend, it really is a top-notch statement, so I want to thank all the folks from CD as well. I'm not going to cover the most important recommendations because you'll hear more from others, but first I want to highlight two or three of them that really jumped out at me. First, it's important to understand the history of this effort in post-secondary education, and it's really out of our desire to have business champions for post-secondary education. So again, linking, as CED does, the business with this important social issue. We think this is very important to the economic well-being of the country. And I would say that in part, as an economist who oversees an organization that's focused on retirement, because as we go through the demographic transformation that's going to occur as all of us baby boomers start to get closer and closer to retirement, we are really going to depend on a society that becomes much more productive. And that's where post-secondary education comes into play. The second thing that's important to note is that the statement promotes policies to increase access to post-secondary education, to enhance the quality of education, and importantly, to boost productivity and innovation within the system. Very hard to do any of those three things, particularly thinking about productivity and innovation in education is a real challenge, and this paper takes that on. The third thing is that this paper focuses on not all of higher ed, but really focuses on broad access institutions. And we use that designation to encompass non-traditional regional colleges, both public and private, as well as community colleges and technical and for-profit schools. This group, I would say far more so than the traditional four-year colleges and research institutions and selective institutions, this group of broad access institutions is critical to addressing one of the great challenges of our time, which is really enlarging the pool of skilled Americans and preparing our future workforce to compete more effectively in the economy. And finally, and this again must be said at this point and will be emphasized later, the program is keenly focused on reforming state policies and on recruiting business champions who can carry our message at the state level. Again, doing what I do, I'm quite focused in on what is happening to the budgets for a lot of our state institutions. There are states that have been cutting back their support for public institutions as much as 18 to 20%, while at the same time increasing their support and funding for state prison systems, for example. And so the notion of really getting the funding right and having business champions at a state level are very important. And we're going to be encouraging all businesses to get involved. And we, in fact, will be recruiting business champions. And indeed, we'll probably be recruiting many of the people in this room to be business champions as we drive towards action based on this statement. So with that welcome and brief introduction, obviously there'll be more to come after lunch, but at this stage it is time for us to enjoy lunch, and then we'll return after lunch to have a panel discussion and a fuller description of the statement. So welcome and thank you, and please do enjoy lunch. Thank you very much.